Been doing it since 2010.
Good afternoon. We're going to call this meeting to order. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so please rise. Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item would be roll call, and we'll start with Jared.
Jared Snaren here.
Javier Marquez, here. Bill Dietrich.
Devin Avilas.
Jim Maxwell.
Kevin Herman.
Clay Dalton.
Ralph Pistoresi.
Jerry Kaczynski.
Before we go to the public comment period, just a couple things to note. This room does have some acoustic issues, so please refrain from having or keep your voice down if you're having a private conversation. The other thing is, if you do want to make a public comment, because this is being streamed, it is necessary for you to come up to the podium and speak into the mic. With that, first 15 minutes of each regular session is set aside for members of the public to comment on any item within the jurisdiction of the committee, but not appearing on the agenda. For items appearing on the agenda, the public is invited to comment at the time the item is called for consideration by the committee. Any person addressing the committee under public comment will be limited to a 3-minute presentation to ensure that all interested parties have an opportunity to speak. Please submit any handouts to the recording secretary. With that, do we have any public comment? Eagle.
Good morning. Igal Trebach. I've been farming in this area for over 30 years. I was unable to come to the last meeting, but I was watching the video replay, and I was quite shaken by some of what I perceive water grab by some of the comments that were going on, meaning not allowing any allocation to unirrigated areas versus irrigated areas, whereby any kind of good businessman would understand that if you have a savings account, you can use that money when you need it. And to me, an unirrigated area is a savings account. It means that you can use some of that water, if transfers are allowed, sell or simply transfer within the same area that we are, is a must. And anybody who wants to take that right away, I'm assuming is going to have some objections. One other item that I'd like to point out, we just finished a study on drilling injection wells, dry wells. And I'll just give you an example. One well operated for 19 days, having water introduced at 0 atmosphere, recharge over the 19 days over 40 acre-feet of water. Imagine if we had 200 such dry wells or injection wells operating in 19 days. Figure 200 times 40, okay? And it's in 19 days. When you've got 215 water, which is new water introduced, and you can sink it over potentially 40 to 60 days, just imagine how much water can go in the ground in 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. The second part of this is, can we get credit for water that we recharge in the ground?
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Taith, and my family has some vines in southeast Madera. I have an observation, a question. It relates to the allocation, but you can, once I pose my observation, maybe we defer it. But from my perspective, it's clarification that I think I need before we pick up where we left off. Last week, there's a lot of confusion about the 2% reduction, what that number tied to, and we were trying to back into numbers and do things. From my perspective as a farmer, the currency I use is water pumped, not water consumed. So there was also some discussion about in February a 240,000 number being mentioned. So I backed into some numbers. If we extrapolate 80%, the 190 is the total consumed water. If we extrapolate that and use the 80% efficiency, that results in 237,500 acre feet of pumped water. If you take 2% of that 237.5, you arrive at the 47.5 annual reduction that we seem to be unable to identify at the last meeting. So the understanding I think the advisory committee had was we start at 237.5 and reduce by 2%, which is 47.5 a year, and we see where we are in 5 years. What happened was I think we started at 190 as opposed to 237.5. 2% of 190 would be 3,800 a year. So it's kind of a currency thing. We're using dollars and staff is using pesos. If we don't do the conversion right, we're going to wind up paying too much. So it seemed to me like now in the chart they show applied water and then they show the conversion rate to consumed water, and they show the conversion rate to applied water. So I guess the question I would have is if pursuant to the regulations I'm entitled to consumed water of 100 acre feet in a given year, does that mean I can pump 125 acre feet to reach that 80% consumption rate? If that makes any sense. I think that might have been the disconnect last week was if farmers talk about what we pump, not what we consume. And I think last week we went from what we pumped to what we consume. That resulted in that year one, the big year one discount that we couldn't put our arms around. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I guess that's the question, is if on your spreadsheet, if the allocation of ETAW is 100 acre feet, does that mean I can pump 125 acre feet?
I think for these purposes, what you're going to see on what's coming up should answer a lot of these questions. Not saying that it will answer your question directly, but if not, you're welcome to come back up during that time period. And
Thank you.
thank you. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 5, allocation discussion and recommendation. Greg and Stephanie.
Stephanie Agneson, Director of Water and Natural Resources. I just wanted to present 2 caveats before Greg does his presentation. The first is we talked last time about not having enough data from the Delta Mendota to have a discussion about what's going on there and setting aside that sub-basin for now. I'd like to continue to do that. And the second piece is we talked about how we were only talking about water for agricultural use, how urban water was essentially taken off the top, and we were not talking about that water right now. So I would like to continue to do that. That's somewhere between 1% and 5% of water use in the county. It's a small number compared to the agricultural water use. So I just want to put that out there, and those comments apply for Mr. Young's presentation.
Well, so last week's spreadsheets obviously encouraged a lot of conversation. And I think it's good. These are obviously very challenging questions before you guys and before the actual landowners out here in both these subbasins, Madera and Chowchilla. And so it's I think, been very helpful to have these conversations because it lets everybody try and progress further down to what might be workable. With that, I also want to say, let's put those spreadsheets in the past for now, and maybe forever. So let me go through some other things. We've been trying to figure out other ways. One of the challenges with those attempting to do those spreadsheets is you have a a varied crop mix across the basins, and we end up with averages, and then we reapply it into only kind of one crop perspective, and then suddenly the things just kind of blow up out of exponentially and don't make sense. So what we're going to go through today hopefully makes a little more sense, and there's going to be a couple of different scenarios we'll walk through on some things. So hopefully it allows for further conversation, but I think it's all been very useful, and I think I've said this before, I have thick skin, so, you know, blast what I've put forward here, and, you know, if we need to shred it, that only makes it better. So I appreciate the opportunity to continue to refine things that we can find can be workable. So I'm going to do a little bit of quick refresher. There's probably some people joining us today, whether online or in the audience here, that were not at prior conversations, and you know, some of you have been involved with this for months and months and months, and others it's kind of just coming to their attention and they're paying a little closer attention to it. So let's refresh a couple of things without spending too much time there. So I'm going to just hit on a couple of things first. We are, as Stephanie had said, we're not talking about the Delta Mendota subbasin, which the county GSA does have, what is it, a few thousand acres, I think, total? 3,000 acres in the Delta Mendota subbasin, so it's not very much. Obviously, to those parties, that is 3,000 acres, and that is important. So we're focusing our discussion on the Chowchilla subbasin and the Madera subbasin, which, just as a little refresher, here's the total area. So it's you hear it often referred to as the white space that kind of comes out of the regulations that the state passed. And so in this map, it's actually shown as the white areas. And so this one doesn't have the distinction between Chowchilla and Madera, but this is Chowchilla Water District, and this is Madera Irrigation District. So you kind of know that the basin goes along here. This is Triangle T. And so essentially, this is the subdivision of the two subbasins. You see a lot of white space in here and just kind of spread all over, and even pockets surrounding and some other spots. So we're talking about the white areas when you guys are considering some of these discussions for the Madera County GSA in these subbasins. And a lot of what I'm going to talk through today really was just because I think I was used to using these numbers more as the Madera subbasin portion, but they're applicable up to the Chowchilla subbasin. So some of the things we might look at are talking about the numbers coming from the Madera subbasin as example. Hello, click. There we go. So I'm not sure what I need to point at here. There we go. It's not clicking. So we went over this last time, pretty just in general to give the concept again. Some of this is a refresher. The current use in the Chowchilla subbasin is about 82,000 acre-feet per year in those white areas. And our native groundwater, when the native groundwater was calculated for the entirety of the basin and proportionally subdivided to the various GSAs, the county GSA in Chowchilla has about 21,000 acre-feet available to it. That's kind of our target at 2040. The Madera subbasin, in similar manner, needs to get down to about 90,000. Now, these are not considering, this is just the groundwater component, so any additional new project water, new other opportunities, we have a couple of slides to talk about that. Those add to this, so I want to make sure that that's clear, and that'll be more clear here in a few slides. So again, just in basic concept, we need to go from current use over here and a glide path or a slope of reduction to some sustainable level, and then stay at that sustainable level according to the regulations for 50 years. You need to be able to demonstrate in your plan 50 years of sustainability, knowing that each year is going to go up and down. They're just worried about long-term averages. So the county GSA is also modeling sustainability with projects, not just demand reduction. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that, make sure everybody was recognizing that our conversation has been about the demand reduction side, but there is some project focus. And the new surface water, we're looking at new surface water into the Madera County GSAs through recharge during non-irrigation, or to maybe irrigate with surface water where we can and get some in lieu benefits. The new surface supplies, we need to secure a source, and that there's a lot of challenges there with getting either contract water or water rights or buying water, and most of you have gone through some of those exercises in the past. We need conveyance agreements. The county GSAs do not have conveyance So we're going to need to work conveyance agreements with entities like Reclamation, like Madera Irrigation District and Chowchilla Water District. And we're going to need big infrastructure in order to take advantage of water when it shows up. And obviously to go with infrastructure and conveyance agreements, which generally people don't just say, yeah, use my canal, but don't pay me any maintenance fee. There is funding that's going to be needed for all this. So in the modeling that's being done to kind of look at, can we be sustainable from 2040 to 2090? In that modeling that was done, and several of you have participated in those presentations that David's Engineering and Ludolf Skalmanini have done, these are the projects, approximate projects that are in for those two basins that are in as new water supplies. And you can see there's a variety of things. It's kind of hard, it cuts off a little bit over here, oops. Recharge along the bypass, recharge in the east area. This is the Madera subbasin, irrigate with surface water in the east area. And then this one still has the demand reduction on here. But these are the top three lines are the water projects that are being looked at, and they're infrequent because they're trying to pick up generally flood flows or excess water conditions, which are kind of anticipated to be 1 in 3, 1 in 5 years. Try and get big gulps of water when they might show up. So that's what's into the model and some time series that's helping try and solve some of the problem, but we still are doing and need to do to get to sustainability, this reduction in demand. So a couple of other considerations that the county GSA is making when we're looking at how to manage this demand reduction. So DWR and by default the State Water Resources Control Board, the entities that will be receiving our plans, care about the subbasin as a whole. And the GSP needs to show reduction at the subbasin level. And as you guys know, that we're working with several other parties in this subbasin to develop this plan. It isn't just the county GSA. In Madera County, it's Madera Irrigation District, Root Creek, a couple others. In Chowchilla Basin, it's Chowchilla Water District and Triangle T. So how we're going to deal with our plan reduction, which is one of our actions in our GSA, we need to be considering things. It's kind of a GSA managed policy that has to consider county economics, grower economics, drinking water needs, water rights, equity, implementability. These are all the things that kind of go into how we're going to try and manage this reduction. The county GSAs recognize landowners need to understand change at a parcel level, and that's kind of where our discussion is, and that's why we put that spreadsheet together last week to try and look at some things at the parcel level. There was just a public comment about applied water versus consumed water. We get all those things. We're trying to help illustrate that so we can help you understand and help you guys think through how to approach this. The GSP may not need to talk about all the details down at the parcel level. It may be able to talk about it at a broad level. This is the intent. We're reducing by certain amounts from again, in the Madera subbasin from 190,000 down to 90,000, and we're doing it through these mechanisms, but we may not need to specify exactly how we're doing it, because some of that we're going to have to figure out in the first year or two, right? So so while it's important and we need to discuss it here because we have to be able to flavor it so it's understandable and that the other GSAs in the subbasin can accept it, we need to put some details to it. We need to understand it so we feel like we're all talking about the same plan. Whether or not the specifics are fully detailed in what gets submitted to the state, there may be a little bit of room to keep some of that more broad-based so we can give ourselves a little bit of time to get the details. But that last point on there is important. We are in a subbasin with other GSAs, and they need to agree with our plan. We all have to sign a coordination agreement. In particular, Madera County in the Chowchilla Basin is working with Chowchilla Water District and Triangle T to do one GSP. In the Madera Basin, Madera Irrigation District, the city, Madera Water District, and the county GSA are doing one plan, and then there's 3 other entities doing separate GSPs themselves. So all of those have to sign a coordination agreement in the Madera subbasin that they're all together on each other's plan and all agree with what's in there. So it's important that we do something that not only we feel comfortable with, but others are going to be comfortable with also. So we've created some additional scenarios, and I want to run through several of these, and again, we can have some questions as we go into this. And I encourage that, but I also want to try and get to the end at some point so then we can come back and look at some things. And I don't have as much animation, so it should be quicker to go back and forth in this version than it was last time.
Greg, why don't you just go through the whole thing? Let's hold questions, go through the whole thing, and we can circle back.
Okay, unless there's a clarifying question maybe we need to address, and if anybody on the council has or committee has a question, we can address that. Yeah, you guys just want me to get through it. Additional scenarios, so transition from 190 to 90,000. Again, we're using the Madera Subbasin as this example. Assuming no projects, we had a slide up there talking about the projects, but in this discussion part, that's off to the side, right? So this is assuming no projects are occurring, the projects would add to this. It does not attempt to resolve questions about the distribution of native groundwater options. I think one of the things that we got significantly wrapped around the axle on last week is about this allocation question to native lands. I think that what we are going to talk about here can kind of be irrespective of what that decision is, and we can push that down. So for instance, the options might be native groundwater is allocated to all lands in GSA area and some market may be established. That's kind of what we had talked about as a prior in February was a recommendation, but there was some pushback again and just rediscussion of that last week. Native groundwater is allocated to only irrigated lands with or without some market that you can maybe move it amongst irrigated lands. Those are kind of the two extremes, and maybe there's some blends in the middle. But I think all of that with what we're going to go through, we can kind of say, well, you know what, let's not worry about trying to address that. Let's look at how we want to try and think about this process of being able to reduce our overall use in this basin. For any scenario, the GSA anticipates a fee structure tied to use. This was something we didn't really discuss, but I think it's an important element that that is key to understanding how some of these things might work. And so, for instance, as a complete example only, because we know these things get printed out, and I don't want people to go running off with this as some fact, that we could have various tiers. In this example, there's 4 tiers listed. There may be another tier or 2 above this, but you would say that each of those little half-acre foot tiers, there's a different price. Maybe the first few tiers are the same price, and they're very, very cheap, if anything, you know. And then you get more expensive with the idea that ultimately, as we're trying to reduce costs there's going to be a higher price to pay when you're taking more water out of the basin for a crop that may need more. So there is, Stephanie.
I just wanted to interject that if we were looking at a fee structure, we would hire a rate consultant to do that work and present various options. So do not get tied around these example-only fee structure with dollar signs, please.
No, that's a good point. So we're going to go with what we now call scenario 4A. This scenario is equal share of ETAW to all irrigated lands. And I just want to try and address the issue that was, or the question that was brought up a little earlier, because it is an important point. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act said you need to sustainably manage water that's being extracted and used from the basin. It's basically leaving the basin. If you're super inefficient, your water just comes out and soaks back in again, and you're just paying a lot of extra money to pump water around. We're really caring about what is consumed by the plants and leaves the basin into the atmosphere. So that's why we're focusing on that, but we know that it translates to most of you guys as how much do I pump out of the ground. But that becomes individual for what your efficiency is on your irrigation system, how you might be managing your irrigation. If you're doing any kind of stressed irrigation programs or what your spacings start to become, everything starts varying from there on a grower by grower basis. So while we try and help translate that, and it might be fine to say, hey, you know, divided by 80% or divided by 60% or something, we're worried about, for DWR's purposes, reducing what's getting consumed, not just trying to become more efficient. That doesn't reduce what's being consumed. So this one assumes 2% per year reduction of the first 5 years, or about 3,600 acre feet a year, starting at the 190,000 acre foot mark. The next 15 years, 4.25%. Again, these are all approximates, right? It's, you know, you start saying 4.25% from what? Well, it's all based off of the 190. I'm trying to use that. So it's about 50. You basically, the first 5 years, about 3,600 acre feet a year, and then you jump to a greater reduction each year. from that 190 to try and get down to about 90,000. This one starts with again, this is the equal share of ETAW to all irrigated lands regardless of crop type. This starts at approximately 2.25 acre-feet per acre. Includes something we're going to introduce called a flexibility pool that's administered by the county GSA. And jumping to what that basically looks like, this is the path. So you see a little bit flatter slope here right in the first 5 years and then a little steeper, but essentially we're going from 190, again, this is the Madera subbasin, down to about 100,000 acre feet. So this wedge right here is what we're trying to reduce, and we're talking about doing it in the scenario 4A represents a way to potentially do that by starting off with everybody gets essentially 2.25 acre feet, and we build in this flexibility pool. So let's talk about what that might mean. So here's a way to kind of look at, we're trying to look at different ways of making this more real and more understandable so we can have discussions about what might work. So in this case, we started talking about how this might operate. So let's, for instance, say step one, in early January, the county offers a quantity for parcel based on an acre foot per ETAW, and that number is going to reduce each year. So let's say we're in 2025, the number has to be 2.18 instead of 2.25, then that's what the number will be, times, let's say you're operating 320 acres of your parcel size, then you get that number times 320, and you're now going to, that is what's offered out by the county as part of the pool of water we have in that year. And the owner is going to choose, and maybe we put some sort of time frame on this, choose by, like, let's just say mid-February, to do one of three things possibly. Take the entire quantity offered, so that 2.25, let's just stay with the 2.25 for now, might not be enough. So you're going to say, hey, I want every ounce of that. A guy growing some other crop like grapes that doesn't need 2.25, he may say, you know what, I don't need it all. And remember, let's layer in the tiered pricing that we talked about earlier. So there's a financial element to this. You're going to say, hey, I only want to take, let's say I just need 1.6 or something for grapes of ET. I'm only going to choose that much of my 2.25, and the rest is going to go back to this pool. Then, or as a third choice, maybe you say, you know what, I got a co-owned parcel. I'm farming some other things. I'm going to take my water that's extra allocation on my grapes, and I'm going to shift it over to my almonds. So I should be, overall, for my water budget on a couple of farms together, I'm going to be okay using that 2.25. So then step three would be the county would find out who doesn't want their full allocation, and there would be this pool. And what you'll see in a slide in a minute, we'll talk more about how that kind of quantifies and what that looks like. But then the county would offer that water back out, and so if you are short, you're growing, let's say we're growing almonds and that 2.25 is not enough, you just say, yeah, there's water in the pool, I'm going to want some water out of the pool. Overall, even with managing with the pool, we're just shooting for about a 3,600 acre foot reduction from that 190 in each of those first 5 years. So what we're trying to do is create a little bit of simplicity without worrying about what's being grown in each place, and say, here's a block of water. If you don't need it all because you don't want to buy it all, you push some back. The county reoffers that out like in a second offering, and those who still are a little short say, yeah, I want that, and they'll pay the next tiers that are associated with taking more above a 2.25 number to get up to what they need. Then you may go to, would have to have also layered on this as step 5 is that the next spring through in some manner, whether we're metering, whether we're satellite, whether we're some combination of things, we're going to be able to look at, well, what actually did you use? How'd that relate to what you took? Here's the bill associated with that tiered fee structure. Then you can imagine that if the reduction goal is continuing there, the county GSA would just change the tiered pricing knobs a little bit to incentivize continued change to help with that glide path. Part of what we think the benefits of the pool might be is that it's not tied to a crop type. It provides flexibility to manage to the growers. It's easier for the county GSA to administer, and it potentially mitigates the perceived disparity in allocating for higher water use crops, allows flexibility for how the county GSA manages the transitional reduction. The challenge is there's still a significant administrative tracking and cost. You still have to watch, and people are going to have allocations, and then they're going to take the second offering, and you're going to have to track things. That's needs administrative costs. And then there's also the potential for disagreements on submitted information. Well, hold it, I said I wanted it all, but you had recorded that I didn't, I turned some back, and and so there's this chance and potential for disagreements between the county GSA administrator and what the landowner is actually doing. You can see that in a lot of things when you have to start worrying about more real data and real what's happening on the ground. So here is a picture of how this works. Why is that blue not showing up at the bottom? Well, no, that's interesting. So something did not print here, and I'm not sure why, so I apologize for this, because this is a huge thing. There's a bunch of bars down here on the bottom that apparently you can barely see. They're right here across this line. That says 17,000. This next line says 14,400, and this is 12,000 and like 8,000 and 4,000. So there's these blocks, and is there any way to shrink what's on the screen a little bit? Maybe not. I see the whole thing. So what's missing though is on this side there's a axis on this side that's thousands of acre feet. So essentially there should be a bar. Let's see. This line right here is 10,000 acre feet if you come from over here. And so 17. What essentially this is saying is there's 17,000 acre feet that came back into the pool that gets offered back out on the second round. And that 17,000 acre feet is likely going to get picked up by all the higher water users that are above 2 1/4, such that the reality is this is a very gradual slope. But we didn't have to worry about who's growing what piece, right? You're growing almonds, you're growing hay, you're growing this. We don't have to try and administer for all of that. So the pool, by giving back to the pool or working amongst your different ownership parcels, we would be mitigating that action by offering that, having a second offering of what got pushed back to the flexibility pool. So it does make a huge difference to see that on there, because I know people, since you can't see that really can become challenging, and all you see is this big drop here, right? So the big drop, the blue is almonds, green is weighted average. You see grapes, then grain and hay. And so what this says also in this process, that if you were only growing grapes, you probably would only need to take what you are getting there, something less than what the allocation is in every year. And so you could always be turning something back to the pool. As we had discussed, there might be an option where you want to turn some of that over to one of your other farms that you might be growing trees on, and you need a little bit extra instead of to the pool, and then picking it back out of the pool, you may just assign it to one of your other parcels that needs it. So what does this look like potentially as an example here? So what we have is there's 4 parcels, 120 acre parcel of almonds that's growing about 110 acres, and I'm sure there's probably better ways to do this. I just reduced the number because there's turnaround areas, there's, you got your staging areas, you got shop areas, you got roads, whatever. So there's the parcel size, and then there's the actual cropped acreage size. So we got a parcel growing almonds, we got a 330 acre parcel growing grapes, there's a parcel growing hay and grain, and then a bigger almond parcel. So here's your ideal ETAW that should be able to fully serve the crop. Here's what you get assigned. Now this one still talks about this native groundwater. I don't want you to focus there. Just focus on the blended number is 2.25 in this example. So essentially you got 120 acres. You're going to have then 120 acres times 2.25 gives you 270 acre feet to work with. You need 311 because if you take 2.83 times your 110 acres cropped, that's what you need, so you're short. So you're going to potentially request from the pool to make up for your shortfall. In the grape example, they're available 743 acre feet. They only need 500, so they actually push water back to the pool, which is another way to say you're not buying this water. You're not paying the higher tiers for that last chunk of water. So you're only buying what you need to spend, and you're pushing the rest back to the pool. So the pool ends up with 430 acre feet. There's a request from the 2 almond guys who are short. They pick up water from the pool. They become whole again, so there's no shortfall. And it's kind of like you allocated by crop, but you didn't worry about what crop was there. You're giving the flexibility to the landowner to make their decisions. This is a very simple example because it only has these 4 parcels. We know that there's about 28, 30,000 acres of almonds out of that 85,000 acres. So there, again, not everybody will be able to pick up from the pool because ultimately we'll have a reduction of about 3,600 acre feet, right? Remember, from the 190 to get down, we're doing those first several years about 3,600 acre feet of reduction each year. So some are going to end up short if everybody wanted it, but some guys may say, you know what, this is, I'm ready, I don't need it. I have a chunk of my land that I was ready to start taking out now, or something else. Some other decisions are being made, and it's in your hands to make those decisions. And so maybe everybody ends up being whole for what they wanted to do for that particular case. And now they start to transition. So if you go to year 5, here we have a lower allocation overall. And again, just look at the combined number. So this is 2.08. So we went, by year 5, we went from 2.25 to 2.08. So it essentially means a greater shortfall. But in this case, there's also a little bit less to push to the pool by the hay and grain guys in this example. And so there ends up being more ask from the pool than the pool has available, so there still is some shortfall. Well, the result of that is now you might start making some other management decisions, right, to try and address that potential shortfall, either changing out crops or irrigating potentially differently, so you're reducing your overall consumption. So that's what this concept is with the pool. The objective is about 3,600 acre feet a year reduction from 190 for 5 years, and then we're accelerating it after that. But what doesn't show up again on this graph is we had it as a 10-year flexibility pool, so we kind of have it in place for 10 years, and then we hopefully have kind of figured things out, and maybe there's a market in place on top of this by that time. Maybe there's some other things we've been able to give ourselves some time to figure out. But essentially, you're letting the county kind of do a second offering of water that people don't want without having the county have to go in and know each crop and what's going on every parcel. So 4C is the same as 4A, but a slightly slower reduction. In this case, it's 2% per year for the first 10 years instead of just for the first 5, which means we increase the slope on the second part of the other 10 years so that we're doing a bigger chunk the last 10. Otherwise, it's all pretty much the same, includes the flexibility pool. Again, it didn't show up here, and I greatly apologize. Shows up nicely. It's probably a problem with using Mac to PC conversion, but there would be bars here, and hopefully the version we put online as a PDF, maybe we'll show these. So I would encourage, if you need to look at this again, we get that version up there. But this also has a pool, but the pool doesn't. Actually, these are bigger numbers. In this 4C, because we slowed things down a little bit, there's more water in the pool for a longer period for that 10 years. About the same at the beginning, but the number stays a little higher into the future. As just to contrast, shifting between these, this is 4C and the slope that you see up here. And if I did my math right, which I often question, this is the change. So if you flick between these two, you see it gets steeper after that 5-year period in one than the other. So this is 4A and this is 4C. So you see this part right here stays flatter longer before it gets steeper. So again, just kind of shifting between those two, you can see that point. So then we did another scenario called 5A, and in this case, the ETAW is the irrigated lands based on crop type. So now we're talking about, instead of the 2 1/4 for regardless of what your crop is, now we're going to be talking about your crop does drive what we end up making available to you. Again, assumes the same 2% per year for the first 5 years. So it's the same as 4A, but instead of one number for every parcel, it's now varied based on what the crop is. The challenges that we had faced, and this also wouldn't have a flexibility pool because apparently we'd be fixing that by giving you a higher allocation if you're growing certain crops than another. The challenges become what is your baseline year to define your crop need? Do we use 2015? Do you use some period before that? Do we use today? There's a lot of questions. What happens if I take a crop out? If I change my crop, does that change my allocation? And it's also much more expensive to manage, probably requiring outsourcing for the county to try and track all that, because now they're tracking what's being grown on every acre, how changes are occurring, what might be happening to the water, and there's a another layer of considerations that go into that we think 4A addresses by that pool and kind of having a secondary offering. So here's everybody gets this amount, this is enough for some and not enough for others. So you make a decision, you kick some back, we offer it back out again, and people will pick that up. This is what 5A looks like. So you can see then each one of these, here's your almonds, here's your weighted average, here's your grapes, here's your hay. So they end up at different points. And so there is some question, you could raise about equity and about other things about what's going on here. But you see everybody really flat compared to those version 4 looked like that big drop right off the bat for anybody that was above the average, or even the average was dropping quickly. But our thought is that the flexibility pool allows you to create this slope without needing to worry about what's going on and empowering the growers to actually figure out how they want to manage. One other thing that kind of occurred to us, and we've been talking with a lot of people, so trying to figure out some things here, is that maybe there's an even further simplified approach than looking at something like 4A and a flexibility pool, and that is just to focus on a tiered fee structure where, again, as you need to keep reducing that quantity of water, that you just keep changing and keep increasing some of the higher tiers, so it gets more and more expensive to take more and more water, and you let it kind of self-regulate itself by adjusting those prices. That probably provides ultimate flexibility to the growers and is probably the easiest for the county to administer. So with that concludes the presentation, and hopefully that's useful for some discussion.
Thank you, Greg. Committee, any questions?
Would the fees be used for infrastructure projects?
We have ideas of how the fees may be used, so let me just talk about ideas, but ultimately I think it's something to discuss that the committee would have some input on too. But we would think that the fees would play into a couple of things. One, it would fund projects, absolutely, and projects that would benefit everybody in the GSA and that subbasin. It also potentially could be used in other manners to help create easements that remove pumping altogether and kind of put an easement on a piece of property where somebody says, I'm done pumping, I don't want to pump anymore, I'm willing to put a land easement on, through my title on my land. So maybe you could do some kind of buyouts in a way on things like that with some of that money as another way to reduce, because overall your goal is trying to reduce these chunks to get from 190 in Madera Subbasin, 190 to 90, and from the 80-something to 20-something in Chowchilla. So I don't know if that, and there's probably other things that could be done within that with monies that are generated, but they would be used to help implement action to get the reductions that you're targeting. Does that help?
Implement the reductions or slow the need for reductions?
Again, the modeling that we did includes projects, but it still needs reduction. So unless our estimates of projects are underestimated, which would be awesome if we can go get bigger chunks of water, then absolutely they would reduce the need for the reduction. But there is a challenge because the county has not been in the water business. To try and go get into the water business and get water and get big chunks where you're trying to get 100,000, 200,000 acre feet every 2, every 3, every 4 years and get that spread, those are some pretty big investments, both in getting the water acquired, getting the infrastructure built. So ideally, yeah, that'd be awesome, but there's probably still a significant amount of demand reduction that has to happen. So I think we just have to recognize that.
Question regarding the flexibility pool. If a grower cannot use all of his water and he puts it into that flexibility pool, what's your vision of, is a grower going to get compensated something for that, or what's that?
So the way that would work, so let's think about the tiered pricing. So if there's a price for the first half an acre foot, the next half an acre foot, et cetera, if you only wanted 1.5 acre feet out of your 2 1/4 that was offered or whatever the number was for that year, you aren't paying for that next chunk. If you just decide you want to take it, you're going to be paying for that chunk. So there's there's an economic incentive to not want to take it if you don't really need it. Does that make sense? So you aren't going, it isn't absolutely given you, it's like, you can buy up to this, you can use up to this much, and here's what you'll be paying to take all of that. If you don't need that much, then that means you're not going to pay as much. And so I think that plays in, rather than trying to create something where, okay, it's yours, and now you can worry about, can you sell it off to somebody else and all this, which is, again, when you start thinking about the tracking of that and the potential where, well, he said I was going to be able to use his water, and, I didn't ever say that. Yeah, we talked about it, but we never signed anything, and next thing you know, the county's in the middle of some big argument battle. So that's part of what we're looking at with some of this of the flexibility pool is you'll make a financial decision as to whether you want it all, based on what you're growing, what your needs are, and how you want to manage going forward. And then you'll either take it or you won't, and you may ask for it to be shifted over to some parcel, and there may have to be some limits on that. So you might be growing, you might have 2 1/4 given to some hayland, and you need a little extra for your almonds, and you're saying, hey, can I just assign that to this parcel over there? We may be able to accommodate that. Seems to make sense. Again, it is more effort than just a straight, hey, we'll just put tiered pricing out there, and you're going to pay for how much you pump.
Kevin, you have any follow-up? Ralph?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. Okay, main question is, all right, first of all, we go out there and spend 50, 60 years of our life, risk everything, go in there and develop all this property, create an economy for this county, okay? And I've drilled the wells, okay? All right, and then I come and listen to you explain how you're going to allocate the water that inherently has always belonged under the ground to the guy that owned the ranch. And I hope he doesn't hypnotize you guys, all right? Because this is water that is your water, all right? And now we're being told that this is not your water, that you were you did something really wrong by developing this ground, which they never told you shouldn't have developed it. Did the state ever tell us, you know what, we don't want you to develop half of Madera County? They never told us, we're going to stop your water use 20 years ago, did they? When we put the crops in and we paid the increased property tax and we paid all the income tax and the state income tax on everything we made, they took the money, didn't they? They did take the money. They used it. There was no complaints. Now we're being mandated to give away the ability to exist. It's no more than a taking of like eminent domain on you, but they're not compensating you. They want to compensate you for water. How about for the entire investment? All right. How would the state like it if we determined that all the pensions of the people that worked the last 60 years should be eliminated or cut in half? Okay, would the state go for it? Or how would the state like it if we decided that they've been spending too much money and spending it wrong, and we're not going to give them any money? Huh? You see what I'm saying? So there's something very wrong here. And when I understand you're supposed to put together a report and come up with numbers because you're an engineer. That's what you do. But we here have a great level of responsibility to consider many things, not just water. It's not just water. Because these decisions that we're going to make are big decisions. Because we have to look at the overall health of the whole county. And what they're saying is, I used an example. I wrote a bunch of stuff here that I'll probably go over later on. I'll let other people talk. But what they're saying, the state is saying, you have 7 children, and we're deeming one of them to have cancer, okay? Just like in this county. This county doesn't have water problems everywhere. There's some problems that are worse than others. But what we want you to do is we want you to treat all your 7 kids with chemotherapy. And the healthy ones too. And we want you to give them a double or triple dose of radiation too. All right? Would you do that? You wouldn't do that. Why are we allowing that to be done to us? It's our responsibility to take measured steps in dealing with all of this. And we cannot be pushing our way to the gallows, because that's what's happening. We cannot, you had their irrigating vineyards with 1.6, no one could irrigate a vineyard with 1.6 acre feet of water. That was what?
That's consumption, not pump. That's what the
Well,
leaves.
well,
So
yep.
you're gonna put on more than that for sure.
Yeah, well, you need to pump 2.25 acre feet minimum with drip, all right? So I'm not gonna go into that part because there's so many, philosophically, this thing is completely messed up. So what I think we need to do is we need to evaluate, because when you're looking at, I farmed all over this county. There's some areas that have real water problems. I mean, the farming won't last there very long anyways. The water's too deep, the wells don't produce, there's not enough sand that has filled with water for the well to produce water. Those areas are gonna move, eventually are gonna be by the wayside. What I think, and one point you did bring up that I did like was, we don't have to make everything perfect everywhere. But overall in the county, if the GSAs work together and they bring up the general benefit of the county, that should still be good. And that should still be deemed sustainable by our standards. And I think we need to develop the definition of sustainability for us, not have someone else do it. So, and there's a few points. I have more, but.
Clay, and then we'll go to Bill Dietrich. No, Bill.
Man, I gotta follow Ralph? That's terrible. Ralph makes a lot of sense. So, Greg, what you presented today, I thought was, obviously you put a lot of time and work into trying to make your presentation simpler and certainly not as complex as the spreadsheet we had last week. And I'm trying to envision the administrative part of what you presented. And I know that you and Stephanie said that it would be easier. But I had to put a couple of thoughts together, and my thoughts run much closer to your last two options. Because obviously the county is going to need to generate significant financial. And so any overdraft water that we are going to draw, transition water, needs to be, we need to understand that that's going to carry some price. And I'm not going to throw a number out. I have some numbers in my mind because I know what some of the more valuable crops would support. And it generates a real big number every year for all of those things that you talked about. Water projects, wildlife corridors, carbon sequestration, land retirement. There's all kinds of things that we cannot imagine today that are going to happen to this fallowed land, because there will be fallowed land in the non-irrigated, the out-of-district lands in Madera County. And it's going to be a significant number, despite any and all projects that we put together for water supply. But it seems to me the simplest way, and I'm not sure if it would be 100% based on crop use, but I'm real concerned about how, I do believe that it has to be adaptively managed based on data that's collected annually. And the fee structure can be set up to manage the water use in the county, because unfortunately, the water in Madera County, the groundwater is being all put to beneficial use, but there are some economical uses. There are some uses that are higher, have higher economic value than others. So I believe that a tiered rate will reward those folks who are growing a crop on 1.5 feet of water. And it will penalize those folks who are growing a crop on 4 feet of water. And if the rate is adjusted and adaptively managed, we will be able to bring about a systematic reduction of acreage over time, and have significant resources to compensate those who have to remove their land from production, at least stop pumping water. We might be able to stop pumping water, plant pasture grass, and get a credit from the state for carbon sequestration. We might be able to make money sequestering carbon, because the state, as we all know, is kind of carbon crazy. So I think there's things that are going to happen that none of us can imagine today, but I do believe that, if the least economic harm to the county itself, as far as income, if our income is significant. I've been told that our income to the county in the non-irrigated area is about 15% of their budget. I'd like to find out if that's true, because if that's true, you take half of that out of production, and that's only 7.5% of the county budget. I don't know. But if, the numbers that can be generated on an annual basis by people who are paying that very high tier rate for that last 1.5 feet of water can finance a lot of land retirement. And, I've got a whole sheet full of bullet points here, but I think that I've made my greatest, the major points are, and then of course there's a lot of detail work. And one last point is that any growers that develop a project to put water in the ground or bring surface water in the district, there has to be an adequate policy so that they can get credit for that. And I'm very, very leery of any kind of water marketing at all.
Right.
So with that, I'll.
Jerry?
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification on where does that administrative pool water come from?
Monitor your wells.
Can you put up the slideshow for a second, please? Maybe this table will help us talk about it a little bit. So there is where to start? Sorry. If we look here, there's a drop each year. So we got to try and some chunk of water. We're talking about 3,600 acre feet. We need to try and reduce each year. So from that, if you divide, you kind of divvy that quantity up. So if it's 187,000 acre feet instead of 190, you divvy that up. It's about that 2.25 number on the current irrigated lands. So now if we were to using that and we go to this table, I say you have for your parcel, you got 150 acres, you get 2.25 times that 150. You don't need it all. Maybe it's fallow land now, or you just took it out, or maybe you're growing some grapes or whatever. And so you say, look, I don't want to pay all the tiers to take that full 2.25. I'm only going to pay the first couple tiers to use that 1.5 feet. And so you're going to tell the county GSA that you don't want the offering of, we'll just use the hay grain example here. They made available to you through this allocation 416, but you only need 216, so you turn 200 acre feet back to the pool by not asking for it, you're not going to pay for your portion. And so that shows up into the pool. That's accumulated from everybody who says, I don't want everything, and then it's offered back out a second time for folks as an additional increment of water if somebody wants to now get it. So that's where the pool water comes from. It's still just within that 186,000 acre feet, and it's just trying to allow a distribution of it in a way that doesn't force a tracking of crops and trying to worry about allocation by crop type and what happens when there's changes to crops and how does that track over time and all that. Does that make sense?
But users would be paying for that?
No, you would ultimately be paying for what you actually consume. So if for instance, and because obviously you don't want people gaming the system here, right? So if you said, hey, you offered me 2 1/4, but I only really need 1/4, and I'm growing trees, and I actually, we run it on that, when we're going through the steps, there was that next spring look, and if we find out through however we're doing it, through meters, through satellite analysis, or something that also has to be part of this, that you actually used 2 1/4, guess what? There's going to be some reckoning of that. So
that's like using the water that I saved last year, just conceptually?
no, again, we're trying to work within this reduction, which is why, the more Stephanie and I kind of just bat around ideas, the whole just having some sort of tiered thing and say, there's no carryover water, there's no way to track it, you either pay for what you need now, and you got these tiers, and you make the decisions, that starts to become the cleanest.
That's what I was getting at, is like, well, who owns that, and how did they get that ownership? Because
anybody.
if you're already paying to pump your water,
Yeah.
and you reduce it, then I don't see where there's extra water that can go to a pool.
Well, it's in the basin as part of the a quantity of water above that sustainable number. It's part of what this transitional water is, this wedge of transitional water that we've been talking about, that the county GSAs have said, look, we're going to try and ease the reduction, but we got to get from here to here. We can do it tomorrow and say everybody can only pump a 1/2 acre foot or an acre foot or whatever, however you end up handling the native non-irrigated lands question. But you do that tomorrow. That's not going to work. And so the other GSAs have said, yeah, we agree that we need to allow a transition. And so it's that transition point that we're talking about. So it is essentially pulling more water out of the basin than is sustainable. So groundwater levels are going to keep going down because of that, as part of any of this transition action over 20 years.
Jared?
So first, I just want to say thank you. This week's presentation is a lot easier to swallow. Appreciate that. Thank you, Greg. But one question, will you be paying for all water pumped? Is there a tier where this is no cost, or is it for everything you're pumping at every tier level, you're paying a fee?
I think as Stephanie noted, that the rate consultant would have to be brought on, and there have to be some discussions about that, but there's a variety of ways to potentially look at that. Yeah, you could say, hey, that first 1/2 acre foot or first foot or something costs nothing, or maybe there's just an administrative fee because we have this added tracking cost that we got to deal with. And then you go up from there. So there's options, but the idea is you want to try and make as Mr. Dietrich was saying, the higher water using or paying the highest price for that last chunk of water that's the way you're going to try and do that, and you're going to keep making that expensive so you adjust over time.
Okay, and then a second question. We talked earlier about the only incentive to utilize less water would be not paying a fee. Would it also be feasible for the county to approach it from a benefit to the grower for conserving or for not utilizing all they want? Instead of it being you just don't pay a fee, you actually get paid by another grower who is using the water.
I think there's probably some creative options that can be discussed to figure out. The challenge, obviously, the more you try and add to it about tracking and who's paying for what and how those things are managed. So let's say you're going to do some action that makes up a little bit of water that you're going to send over to Devon. And are you going to just tell the county? Are we supposed to know that? Do we have to have some piece of agreement or piece of paper between you two that you're doing that so that we can give you some incentive to do that? But what if he says, I never did that. I'm not paying his bill. And, suddenly there's this added layer that could happen. I'm not suggesting that would, but that's part of the risk of doing more layers of where the water is tied to and how it starts moving around is more complex.
No. You'd have to have tickets and contracts and,
Right,
just
right.
like any other piece of produce that you're moving from site to site.
So I would think that the potential would be there for some sort of incentive. It's done in the, in fact, Stephanie can probably speak to it, in the urban conservation realm, where they've done things where it essentially, if you're using less than some kind of threshold, there's an incentive payment to do that rather than disincentive. You want to expand on that?
Well, I would just add that in the urban sector, so for homeowners, tiered rates are extremely successful in getting demand reduction, with one exception, which is very, very high-income customers who don't care how much something costs.
Chair, do you have any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Wait, Ralph, let Clay, I'll come back to you. Let Ralph, or
Me first or Clay?
Clay.
Clay, go ahead.
Listening here, given the current legal mandate that we've all volunteered to implement or deal with, and without diminishing whatsoever Ralph's historically broad perspective that he gave, I think what's been presented today was sensible. Thank you.
Ralph?
Well, I kind of disagree with Clay, but look, let's think about it. Let's get really what's going on in Madera. All right. Has Madera in the last 60 years had lawsuits against each other, one area against the other? No. No, we haven't had any of these problems, but we're starting to get Sacramento's decisive government where they want to divide one area of the county against the other area of the county and fight and create this water market system that they really want to implement. And they want to implement this system, as I said in the other meeting, not that we're going to buy the water. They're talking like you guys are going to buy the water. You're not buying the water. Other people will buy the water. You won't see that water. And they won't have to buy the land either, Bill, because the vineyards and the orchards are going to dry up and they're not going to be, there's no reason for them to buy them. They're going to get them later anyways. So I really don't trust any of this. What I think should happen is the GSAs need to get together. And we need to be very not specific like this. We need to be very unspecific when we're dealing with the state. And we need to say, we're going to work together and we're going to manage our problem. Now, I know people in the MID there's some people in the MID that say the water's all ours, the rest of you guys can all dry up. All right? Okay, that's what they're going to say. All right? Well, you've got to have something to offer them. All right? So what can you offer? The MID is the only solution to this whole thing because that's where the water comes in. So what we need to do in the white area, we need to find projects that we can work with the MID in the MID's district, in the heart of the middle of their area. And we say, we're going to make a recharge basin. We're going to buy the water. We're going to put it in there. And we're going to make you whole, better than whole. But you got to let us keep doing what we're doing over here too. Because where you're farming and you're farming, Kevin, up there, you're not diminishing the water in the MID. That water comes through so quick and fast through you, you're just getting a little bit of it. I don't see any reason why that area of the economy of this county should dry up for any reason. I think what we need to do is we need to focus on how to make the county in general, where the water is available, and then even better off. And then I think we need to make systems where you can connect into the MID once in a while, and you can buy water from them when it's available to you. And I think we need to try that approach for a while and see how it works. That's what I think needs to be done. I'll tell you what. Listen, you guys you need to make the right kind of plan so that we are able to maintain an economy in this county. And I can tell you what I think the direction you should take by telling you a story. And the story has a moral. Listen it through. When I was 5 years old, my grandmother told me a story. And Kevin, you'll appreciate this because there's a fig tree involved. All right? Okay. So there's this 5-year-old kid. There's a young kid, and he's wandering around, and a big wolf is in the neighborhood, and he sees the wolf, right? And he's scared of the wolf, and the wolf sees him. And this kid climbs up a fig tree, and he's safe from the wolf. And the wolf comes underneath the fig tree. And the wolf says, "Hey, little kid, come down." He says, "No." He says, "Well, you throw me a fig, and I won't eat you." So the kid gets a fig. He throws it to the wolf. Wolf eats it. One fig after another. This kid is climbing these branches, breaking his neck to get this wolf the figs. And this wolf is eating the figs, right? This kid is working so hard at getting figs, he doesn't even eat a fig. Pretty soon, there's no more figs on the tree. And the wolf's there underneath the tree, waiting for the kid, because the kid's hungry, and he's got to get down one of these times, because the wolf wanted to eat the kid in the first place. I'm saying that these guys are saying, "Here, I'll let you live. Just give me another fig. Give me a little bit less water. Give me a little less water." But pretty soon, sooner or later, we're going to have to get out of the tree, and we're going to get eaten. All right? Your job is to keep the wolf. When I first learned this story, I thought the problem was there was not enough figs in the tree. That's how and the other night I thought about this story, and I realized the solution could have been the kid should have told the wolf, "You know what? You're not getting one fig." And the wolf would have got hungry, and the wolf would have went away. I think that's the approach you guys need to take, with the state being the wolf.
Does anybody else from the committee, because if we don't have anything except covering what other people have already said, we should get to public comment.
In furtherance of some of the things that Ralph said, first off, congratulations. This is obviously an evolving process, and you've made a huge step in the last 6 days in progressing with something that's got elements of common sense that can work. We're in the ag lending business, and we deal with a lot of ag lenders. So I just ran some of last week's proposals by some lenders, and they said if that were to pass as written, they would deem that as an immediate event of default in the mortgages, hundreds of agricultural mortgages in this county. So one of your mandates in your early slide was the county's economy, for which this group needs to be responsible, regardless what their individual interests may be. I think when we set the water rate, we can't lose sight of the fact that we're all pumping that water. So we have big power bills and big pump maintenance bills. So when we talk about the economics of how much water a certain crop can afford, we have to remember that all those farmers have a big investment in that water before there's ever a fee going elsewhere. As to the fees, have you contemplated the possibility of paying a grower to remove his crop along with an agreement that would be recorded on the land that would say it wouldn't be planted for whatever, the next 10 years to 5 years, 15, 20 years? If we all use some of our money to start taking out some of the water users in the county, that might help slow the process a bit. The other thing is, in the first either 5 or 10 years, depending on which scenario we follow, you were talking about maybe 3,600 acre feet a year reduction. I can tell you that in this year, certainly, and in a number of recent years, we alone have imported over 3,600 acre feet into the wide areas of this county. So I'm not sure if we continue to do that, where that water goes. If it becomes part of the pool, if it causes us to adjust the chart, but just be aware that that's going on, and depending on pricing, may continue to go on.
Address a couple of those things. And first of all, those are great comments. One of the things that is always a challenge in this when trying to set forward a plan that's supposed to have sustainability from 2040 to 2090, that's something that is pretty infeasible for a lot of us to think about that far into the distance. So the numbers, like the 190,000 acre foot, is based on a long-term average, knowing that some years it's greater, some years is less because rainfall drives some of that. There's, waters have been brought in various years. So all of that absolutely plays into how things might get looked at each year. And I would think that the long-term goal is to see the gradual reduction of that average. And that let's say there was some tiered fee structure set forth to try and incentivize that long-term reduction, that looking at how that fee structure gets put forth on a year-by-year basis may consider several of those types of things as to how much reduction you may be trying to target based on what may be occurring with other projects coming in and complementing. So, there's lots of moving parts. We're supposed to, by state law, prepare a plan that says you can demonstrate implementability and sustainability by 2040. So starting 2040 on, you're supposed to be sustainable. That's the state mandate. We're trying to figure out some way to get there, but I think there is some flexibility. We put forth a plan that says, here's the approach we're taking, tiered structure. We're planning to watch the long-term average annual reduction in the demand, that there may be flexibility within each of those years that we can address things like you represented there with extra water in a particular year. This was a really wet year, so you would assume people aren't going to want to pump as much because they got contributions from Mother Nature.
Kevin?
I recognize the fact that the state mandates that we get to sustainability by 2040, but I think we've come a long way today compared to last time because we've kind of narrowed our focus down to fewer things. And I'd like to suggest that staff and the committee both do that even more so. We need to really spend the bulk of our energies on what's going to happen between now and 2025. We've talked about a 2% reduction, and I think we need to try to figure out what that looks like, whether it's at flat 2.25 acre feet, whether it's by a crop. Another big variable is making this user-friendly for farmers. So because if the farmers don't understand what they're supposed to do, it's going to be a dismal failure. And one of the problems that we had last week was we were talking about ET water versus pumped water. And right now, we're being told we need flow meters. Okay, that implies pumped water, not ET water. No one's asking us for crop, tree spacing, yields, and all those things that would turn the ET of a young pistachio orchard into something way different than the ET of a mature pistachio orchard that's got a 90% canopy. And once again, when it comes to the administrative part of that, that's going to be a nightmare if we have to start to look at those aspects of it. So I'd like to suggest that we focus on coming up with something that's simple and practical and focuses on pumped water, not ET water.
Simple. Jared? Oh, I'm sorry. Greg?
I just wanted to add to the thinking to follow on what Kevin had just talked about. Actually, one other comment I wanted to make is that you had been more specific about, one of you had about easements and paying people to potentially fallow land with the monies generated. That absolutely is something that is I think should be looked at in combination with financing projects. And I didn't really come out and say it as much, but that was the intent of, you could put something on the title. In some way, there's some agreement that says, okay, I'm not going to pump for a little while or for permanent, right? Those options should be there. They should be part of the tools. I don't know if any of you are farming down in or have friends who farm down in the semi-tropic area, just to raise, so like they had a grower meeting yesterday. You probably know then if you're down there, they've given you an ET budget, right, for
I didn't
lands?
make the meeting, I don't know what happened.
Okay. Well, they've been doing this over the last couple of years. So not just yesterday, but in the past, I think they started a couple of years ago, they gave a kind of an ET budget that says, here's what, from satellite-based stuff, here's what we see, which takes into account canopy, age, all that kind of stuff. Here's what is consumed off the fields based on this analysis that they do. And they said they're setting their budgets tied to that and fee structures tied to that. So it's doable in that way. One of the things that adds to the complexity, I know there's not much difference, but they have even less rain down there than we have here in Madera. And so there is an aspect of the rain benefit versus what you're pumping out of the ground when you just look at ET only, not ET of applied water. So those are all nuances that I think we can address in ways, but I think there are mechanisms to accommodate what you were talking about, Kevin, with different crop ages and things like that can be done. And there's other places in this valley dealing with Sigma that are addressing it in a similar manner.
The prune industry a number of years ago, they had too many prunes instead of too little water. And so all the prune growers got together, recognized the only hope they had is to pay growers to take out. So they did, and a lot of prune acreage, the growers stepped up, they responded to that, they took out their orchards, the price of prunes went up, and everything was fine. So it's a similar concept, we might even use their model.
Jared?
I just had a quick question on the market, what Ralph brought up. In designing one, if we design one, aren't there ways that because we are designing it, say where, who, how, why water can be sold within our small little area to ensure that we don't have a situation where we're taking it from, and I would not say restrict it to go across county lines for agricultural use, but yeah, you can't just sell it to Metropolitan. You can't sell it to the state, correct?
Yes, that's right. So there is a groundwater ordinance in the county of Madera. You cannot export groundwater over the county line. And we do have that grant from the Bureau of Reclamation. We would design the market. And the key component of that is stakeholder input. So we get to decide what the rules are. And then they will do, we'll do legal analysis and kind of look at pros and cons of different approaches.
Bill, one question, and then I'm going to shift over to public comment. We can always circle back to the committee. Bill, did you have something?
Yeah, I almost feel like I want to read this into the record, but it would probably take 2 minutes. It's just that I gave it some thought, and Land IQ does that. I mean, down there, they know how much water, and my concept is to use similar firm. Land IQ, I know, does it, but that way you know how much water you pay for. And my idea is to do it strictly on fees, and fees will reduce water use on a tiered basis. And there will be significant money generated to do exactly what Jim had talked about. And there's other uses for the land that'll have to be found. But I am very much leery of a water market. I really am. I think the native yield, along with regulated overdraft, is used to support irrigated lands that are already in production and supporting the economy of the county. Regulated overdraft is going to be the source of funds for the county GSA to implement actions which will bring the subbasin into balance by 2040. Each water user will be able to continue irrigating at their previous water use for 2020, but usage will be purchased on a tiered rate scheduled to be determined. The pricing will be such as to discourage high water usage and generate significant funds for the following: Water projects to increase groundwater recharge and deliver surface water for in-lieu recharge where practical. Purchase conservation easements where land would not be irrigated by groundwater. Develop carbon sequestration banks, pasture and cattle production, habitat mitigation banks, wildlife corridors. And finally, to mitigate disruption to the disadvantaged communities and rural domestics wells from continued groundwater decline during period of adjusting to sustainability, because those negative effects will continue for a period of time. Overdraft water pricing will be adjusted to place downward pressure on water use. Fees generated would be used for the above until balance is achieved. This process will use adaptively managed based on continued data collection and response. New overdraft groundwater users would have access to their native yield. Investigate thoroughly before applying a water market, and at a minimum, there needs to be a credit system which incentivizes growers to do what Jim mentioned earlier and develop and build projects that increase their water supply over and above projects that are GSA-wide. Any transfer system must be hydrologically sound. Madera County should not attempt to monitor water use on a well-by-well basis or allocate overdraft water or any water on a per-acre basis. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, before we go to public comment, I think all of us need to get back on track. What we're trying to determine here right now is the allocation, and we're getting hung up on the market. That is something that we can address, but right now, and I don't think it's going to come from today, is a recommendation. I think we need to take back what we're learning today and then schedule our next meeting, and then we can come back hopefully with some sort of recommendation at that point in time. But I think we're getting hung up on a couple things, or the one big thing right now is the market. I think we should get back to thinking about what this allocation is, and from that, I'm going to turn it over to public comment. Eagle.
Igal Trebach. Two comments. Number one, I have a question in regards to the pool. Now, if I don't use all of my allocation, and being a businessman, and every farmer is a businessman, what I would try to do is I would try to use as little water as I can to begin with. And if I can save a little bit of extra for those years that I'm going to have less of an allocation, I would like to be able to do that. So that means that we need to put into the plan some kind of a mechanism that will allow us to save some of the water that we're not using for the next year or the year after. I think that would be very important as a business person. The second comment really has to do with the fact that if we're farmers and we're businessmen, it may behoove us to get into selling or exchanging water within the same aquifers. I think that is necessary in order for us to conduct good business. Thank you.
Thank you, Eagle. Wayne?
Hi, I have several comments. One, yes, acre feet. Please simplify and just go to acre feet. And don't even think about 100 acres, 120 acres. I think all of us that farmers have a pretty good handle on, oh, I need roughly so much acre feet a year for my crop. And we can do the simple math to figure out what our acres are. Secondly, the flex pool in there, I don't think is going to work. And if we look at this year as an example, you're talking about in January, we're going to say, oh, I'm going to have X amount of extra water. I had no idea in January how the year really was going to work out. Many of us have riparian rights. Many of us either have hookups to a water district or are working on getting them. In a year like this year, every person in this room who can be taking excess water through MID, through Chowchilla, through whoever, we should be paying that extra money to do it, but we should be getting a credit for next year or the year after when another dry year comes along. I just think, well, recharge. If I'm going to flood my fields in December and make farming awkward for me to do through the winter by doing that, I deserve credit for that. I kind of think going to have to come at some point to a native allocation or some sort of a minimum. As a farmer, I would really appreciate that because I'm not planning just for next year or the year after. I happen to be a pistachio guy, so I already have experiments out in my field. I'm working to find out how much do I really need to put on my trees to keep them decently profitable. And for me to do any kind of planning, it would be so helpful to have at least a crude idea that in 2040, I'm going to have X amount that I can pretty much count on. And it also helps me plan, be it recharge, surface, whatever method to get to where I need to be on my farm to keep it profitable. Another point, and I realize going into markets here, but everything I have heard in talking among farm groups has been marketing is something that is going to be done among farmers. And frankly, finding out all of a sudden that the county of Madera is going to get involved, well, I'm not comfortable at all. The reality is, while our farms are tremendously important to us, yes, the county of Madera would prefer not to lose our tax dollars and the income for them that we generate. We're not 50% of their revenues. We're a relatively small portion. Even among farming, we're a minority compared to MID and Chowchilla Water, all the water districts in there. Easy thing for them to do to balance the budget is to allow more buildings, such as has already jumped the San Joaquin River along the 41 corridor. And we all know that they can pay a lot more per acre foot than any of us in this room in farming can pay. If there is a water market, farmers, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Samantha with Farmland Management Services. I've jotted down a couple different thoughts and things that I've heard from the board, so it might sound like I'm repeating, but these are some takeaways that that I've got from this. While no matter what the reduction in pumping is going to be, it's going to be painful. I think we can see that just from the numbers. But I think by implementing groundwater reduction and allocations, pushing them as far out to 2025, like Kevin said, focusing on, because we have the ability with Sigma and the flexibility to adjust every 5 years, while the impact might be greater in 5 years from now, I think that those farmers can do a lot in 5 years. I haven't been in agriculture for too long, but from just the different experiences I've had, you guys are all farmers, a lot of you are farmers, you guys are capable of a lot. And I think that by pushing the allocation reduction out 5 years, it can give the GSA, the county as a whole, time to gather more data. If landowners know that in these wet years, you know, we're capturing a lot of water as flow meters go in, as pump tests are done, we can begin looking at where those water levels are at. And by gathering that data and shuffling it to the engineers like Greg, they're able to put it into the model. And really, it may help determine whether that ramp down as we begin to implement these projects, work with landowners that are able, or the county who is able to work with MID or some of these resources that have surface water. When landowners are redeveloping, maybe if you know you're going to be reducing your imprint on your property, communicating that, because I feel that in 5 years, the county, if us landowners work together, a lot can be done in 5 years between now and 2025. And so even though there is a risk, I think that, Bill, I keep hearing you say that the economic, impact that it could have, there's all these things that I keep hearing. But realistically, farmers are now beginning to really think and acknowledge SGMA, and I think that now with this in mind, we're able to modify practices, farming practices, and think about redevelopment projects and not plant every square foot of the property. And so by pushing it out, I think that that's going to give us a little bit of flexibility. Maybe, I don't know, but these are just some of the things that I hear, and then we can focus our efforts on finding excess water, even though there's not a whole lot, unfortunately. But these different, looking into water markets and these different options. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Berry. I'm not speaking on behalf of any client. I'm just giving some information from my own background. I spent some time as a lobbyist for the American Farmland Trust in both Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., and so I'm very, very familiar with easements and agricultural easements and the long-term effects of those. And I just wanted to put my 2 cents in as far as, for those people who don't understand how an easement works, it's the extinguishing of a right to do something on a property, and there's a monetary value for that. For example, when you do an agricultural easement, the monetary value is calculated by looking at the agricultural value versus the development value of a particular property, and you are compensated for that, and you can only use that property for farming, which, in my opinion, is a great thing. I think we should be very careful about looking at permanent easements to extinguish the ability to pump groundwater on properties for several reasons. That's forever. It's into perpetuity. I think a better opportunity would be a management contract between a landowner and the county, which is maybe a term contract, maybe it's a 20-year contract where it's like a Williamson Act, or maybe it's a 10-year contract, because what I see happening are islands being created where we're not farming, and that brings on all kinds of nuisances for your neighbors. You have dumping, you have squatters, potentially. That landowner is not incentivized anymore to maintain their property. You've got weed problems and pest problems that transfer to your neighbors. So I just wanted to put that out there, since I have a lot of experience with easements and they are permanent. And I think that these term contracts are something that the county might want to look into, and I think it would benefit landowners. And also, there could be a time in 2040 or 2050 when that property can be brought back into production, and that's kind of the goal, isn't it? So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Julia. Christina?
Christina Beckstead, Executive Director at Madera County Farm Bureau. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of points. One, the importance of working together. SGMA, this is an all or nothing situation at this point on a sub-basin level. And in Greg's early slide, there was mention of coordination agreements and that stuff. That needs to happen across the basin, all of the basins, right, across the county, and as well as with our neighbors. And we need to keep an open mind in how this is going to pan out for everybody, because ultimately there are some creative solutions or potential creative solutions that are going to come to light, and everyone needs to be open-minded about it. But we do this all together or we don't at the end of the day, and I know a lot of you have heard me say that over and over again, because I can't stress the importance of that. There will be cutbacks, we know that. Some are going to hit harder than others, but there has to be a transition period, and I think that was the intent of SGMA, right? I mean, you have till 2040 to figure out how to become sustainable, so that in itself relays the importance of being able to transition into something. But for the white areas or any other area, that initial allocation, I think, is something that's important that I would hope that the county and the other GSAs that are involved through the process keeps an open mind to that, because you've got to give people the opportunity. It's like retirement, right? You don't just retire from one day to the next. You have to be able to transition into that And I think the only way that the county will continue to be able to reap the economic benefits of what is the agriculture industry is to allow for that period of transition. So I just want to point that out and keep that in everybody's mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, ma'am.
Larkin Harmon with Harmon Brothers and Clayton Water District. And I just wanted to say thank you for putting up a slide based on allocation for acres. I highly advocate for that because it still gives us a little bit of freedom on the farm to transition to lower water use crops and let us as individual growers figure it out on our own. So I just wanted to say thank you.
With that, is there any additional public comment? I know, Stephanie, you have yours. One quick thing from the committee. Obviously, I think many of us are not prepared to make a recommendation right now, but what we need to do is think about what we want to task Greg and Stephanie with for our next meeting. So Stephanie's going to read a public comment, and after that we'll come back with any other comments from the committee and then some tasks for staff. Stephanie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a comment from Amanda Monaco from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. She was unable to be here today. We work with rural, low-income communities in the Central Valley, like Fairmead and Lavina, who depend on groundwater for drinking water. Families in Fairmead and Lavina depend on groundwater from domestic wells as well as small community water systems, meaning that they have the most to gain and the most to lose from GSA's groundwater management activities. If their wells go dry or become contaminated, families in Fairmead and Lavina will have financial difficulty digging deeper wells or paying for deeper community wells or water treatment plants. Since drinking water is an essential element of a healthy and safe home, and California has recognized the human right to drinking water, we must consider the impacts that any of the GSA's activities may have on precious drinking water resources, particularly for families who do not have the means to dig deeper wells or pay the high cost of expanding their community drinking water system. Vicki Ortiz from Fairmead, who is a member of the advisory committee, expressed to us last week the importance of protecting her community drinking water resources. She knows that there are many pumpers who use a lot of water around Fairmead and hopes that any decisions the GSA makes about how to allocate groundwater resources will protect her community's drinking water. The GSA should not let surrounding operations pump so much groundwater around them that their wells go dry, or allow for groundwater pumping patterns that move contamination plumes and make their drinking water become contaminated. We urge the advisory committee to consider drinking water impacts in deciding how to allocate groundwater. Groundwater allocation should guarantee that communities like Lavina and Fairmead are allocated enough water to serve their drinking water needs now and in the future, accounting for future population growth. The allocation should also ensure that the surrounding groundwater users do not lower groundwater levels in Fairmead or Lavina so much that families' wells go dry or pull contaminant plumes into the community's drinking water supply.
Thank you, Stephanie. From that, we'll come back to Clay. I know you had wanted to make another comment.
I did. Mr. Diedrich had the advantage of having 2 pages of prepared materials to which I was in agreement, disagreement about 50-50, and would like a chance to reply. I would have liked to have had an advanced chance to have read it. Can't do that today, perhaps in the future.
Anything else, Clay? No. Any other comment from the committee members? So to go with our task, I think, Stephanie, I mean, we're just going to have to refine or let the committee digest what was presented today. And then
it sounded like refinements of the options that were presented might be in order.
Yes.
We can do that. We would like more time than the past week that we've spent with these scenarios. As you saw, 4A and 5C or whatever, there were many other iterations. So I might suggest a meeting mid-June as a special meeting.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll pull the committee in terms of availability and the room space.
Sounds good. With Kevin?
Just a suggestion for what to focus in on between now and that, whenever that meeting is. I'd like to suggest that we can't ignore 2040, but I'd like to suggest for the time being, we focus on the next 5 years, number one. Number two, we focus on trying to evaluate the flat 2.25 acre feet or doing the allocations by crop. I think we need to dig down a little deeper to be able to make some comparisons in that regard. I'd also like to suggest that we focus the numbers that we're throwing around based on pumped water, not on ET water. And fourth and finally, I'd like to suggest that we set aside whether it's the flexibility pool or the private water market, call it whatever you want to. It seems like there's a lot of concerns about, for lack of a better way of describing it, the government getting in our kitchen. And I think that as farmers, there's a sentiment amongst most of us that we'd like to do that ourselves. Those are my 4 thoughts.
Bill?
Yeah, I believe that the pool water, as it was outlined, is going to be an incredibly complex administrative operation. And I believe that trying to measure every ground well in this basin is going to be extremely difficult. I believe that we have got to use consumptive use as measured by a similar process that Land IQ uses. I'm fully metered on all of my wells, but I know there's a lot of wells out there and it would require a lot of meters to try and go on pumped water. Everybody has a different efficiency. I think what the crop uses is the way to go. So I disagree with Kevin on that one. I encourage everybody on this advisory committee to spend time to try and formulate and put their thoughts down. And I was rapidly trying to get this finished up 30 minutes before we got here. And when I got here, the printer was busy and we were not able to make copies of this for everyone, so I apologize.
Yes, to be clear, if you have something that you need distributed, you need to give it to me maybe more than a half hour ahead of time, and then we'll block out some time on the printer because we're printing the budget upstairs. But we need to make copies available for the public as well as the committee. So if you were to bring copies, you need to bring like 100 copies.
And that is the reason for me trying to read it into the record.
Ralph?
Yes, Stephanie, I think we need to formulate the plan conceptually and not try to lock into any numbers, lock into a bunch of saying that we're going to meter everything and do everything. We need to be very, very loose. Remember the story about the wolf, okay? That your job is to keep the wolf and get him tired, make him go away, all right? So that's what we have to kind of work in that direction. It may not look great but it works. So I think that's the direction. And the other thing I would like to mention is I think maybe some people on the board, if you know people on the MID board, we need to talk to them a little bit because we're going to need to work with MID. We got to get them to kind of see our way a little bit. And if you have any projects that you can implement and make the MID happy with what we want to do, I think it's not a bad idea. We maybe can't talk to ourselves too much, but we can talk to the other GSA.
As a chair, Ralph, I nominate you to talk to MID. So
I've already done it. I've already done
They
it.
won't talk to us.
I've already done it.
With that, we'll go to item number 6, which is Director's Report.
Sure, I do not have a PowerPoint, but I did want to remind everybody that we do have 2 meetings next week on May 29th. They are both related to GSPs. The Chowchilla meeting is at the Portuguese Hall in Chowchilla from 10 to 12. There's a joint GSP meeting in the Madera Subbasin, so the 4 agencies that are working together on one GSP, and that's from 2 to 5 here in the board chambers. Those are both May 29th. That's all I have.
And that is also up on the website, correct?
Yep.
Okay. With that, come back to the, I think we've made it. You have a comment? Thanks, Jim. Of course. Go ahead.
You know, in looking at some of the other basins up and down the valley, including, I believe, one in this county, as they're looking at options, one of the options that they're looking at and that they seem to be leaning toward is one that has the native pasture lands retaining the right at any time to drill wells, start irrigating, and plant their acreage. And I think that we would be foolish to try to deprive them of that right. By the same token, those same groups are taking that native groundwater underneath the pasture lands, taking all of that and allocating it to lands that are currently being irrigated. And I think as you present options for us going forward, that those need to be included in the ones that we're looking at so we understand the impact of going either way on that particular issue.
With that, I want to thank all of you for coming, and one comment I do have is I know this is a very difficult topic for all of us because everybody's going to be impacted by this with our livelihood, and what's good is we can chat and we can agree to disagree, but having everybody in the room talking is a great start, so hopefully it will get better by the next meeting. With that, we will be adjourned.